So I'm going to show a number of projects there are a number of different projects of a variety of scale and program. And these projects are, as all projects are, I think, and I want to kind of stress that, are experiments kind of in space, or spatial experiments really, spatial ideas with this variety of scale and program and format. And just to say a little bit about how our practice began, our first commissions were installations, exhibitions, as George mentioned, lofts. We did a lot of lofts in New York City. That was kind of the first thing we were able to work in. We were very excited when we got our first footing to do. That was incredibly exciting. There wasn't even a building boom at that time. There wasn't even a burst bubble. There was very little happening, but we were kind of, you try to make as much as you can of what you get. So these projects are tests for ideas, and as programs, the programs have become more diverse, and likewise our techniques and methods for working have evolved tremendously. I don't know if they've evolved, but we've been using a lot of different techniques than when we first began. So you'll see maybe a realm of that spectrum of that as you see the work. And the projects I'm going to show are a couple residential projects, the model apartment, the Pier 11 Ferry Terminal, as was mentioned, a mixed-use building in Korea, a house in Sagaponack, Picture This, which is the outdoor amphitheater, Corning, an aquarium, the ports projects, and a recent project for an EMS station in the Bronx. So I want to use this idea I titled the lecture Moving Space, and I was thinking, well, maybe it's moving space and ideas and infrastructure, but this idea of moving space in relationship to these projects as a way of, or a kind of lens through which you might look into them and maybe help frame the ideas that drives them and our practice perhaps. So when you think about space, you might think about nothing, right? You might think there's nothing there. It's space. There's like nothing here. There's stuff around it. There's nothing here. So I like to think of, this idea of Jerry Seinfeld when he describes his television show and he says it's about nothing, right? But it's really, it's about life and about everything. So it's kind of nothing, but it fills up. So you might think the same thing, and that moving space, that this is about moving nothing. But so the question is, does space move? So when you're looking out, this slide is looking out of a window, and space, of course, doesn't move. It lies waiting, right? Space just lies waiting. So bodies and objects obviously move through space. And here this view, I love this image of this incredible kind of disjunction between and juxtaposition between the interior of the space shuttle and then, the view obviously in that window outside, and how different, but things lying in such close proximity that are so absolutely different. So is that true that bodies in space move and space doesn't move, that it just lies there? So for this idea, I want you to consider of moving space, I want you to consider that space is in a kind of exaggerated and heightened space, a heightened sense, space in which big and small things move, and space where events happen, and space where things overlap, and space which is full. So space is really full, kind of waiting and full. This is the first illustration I could find, it's 1350, of a graphic representation of movement for the first time. So it's just obviously a kind of X and Y axis. I mean, it couldn't be more simple, right? These three different renditions of it. So I wanted to kind of consider how space was represented, how space and movement were represented in time, just kind of briefly here. And so obviously then in the Renaissance, space is formulated partly optically, haptic, and partly the real thing. So this is a very, very reductive description of Renaissance space, but this projection on a flat surface and this notion of the invention of perspective. So is this a representation of moving space? where the results of rotation, right, are kind of throwing these molecules of water displaced and held against the edge into this spatial configuration, and this results in movement. So the diagram exemplifies a mathematical space that responds to a kind of thickness and dimension and form, and it's reactive. And, you know, it's also, of course, time. When we think of movement, it involves time, and time can be written in many different modes, such as a tidal chart or obviously clock, charts, flow diagrams. So, you know, when one brings this notion of movement into space, you know, time gets kind of involved in this messy picture. Another space-time drawing is this image of the point of a rapier, of a fencer. And so what's trying to be described here is both depth and a kind of drawing of a movement, right? So it gets thicker or darker when it moves forward, right? So there's a depth that's implied in this diagram of movement, of space and movement, or of this very contorted drawing of the pigeon from Gideon's book, in which this pigeon is harnessed to record a trajectory of a wing path, and to show movement in space as a kind of recorded artifact. So this is a very early drawing on ink. That's why it's so faded here. This is actually ink on Mylar than whatever we did at the time. But this is an early little apartment that's called the model apartment, and we tried to jam everything we possibly could in here in this project, as one does. And so the idea was that if there was one thing that one brought into this tiny little space in this old police building in Manhattan, which was this wall, that everything one needed in life would be attached to it. So your table would come off of it, your bed would fold out, your television, which wasn't even a flat screen at the time, that there were hooks, that everything was somehow embodied within this wall, and that it was a kind of moving divide. Things moved and changed according to program and use, but that all you really needed to come in was with your suitcase. And then this is a house that we did in the country, and it's for people who are extremely urban, and so it's elevated off the ground. There's really only one way in. They were kind of terrified about what might be in nature, but they're, you know, perched up there and looking at this tremendous view, which is the Delaware River. But it's the absolute, so I'm kind of, you know, showing it together with that model apartment, which was all interior, and this all exterior. Well, I'm showing you the exterior, but it's just really the kind of minimum dwelling that you could build according to the, you know, the Uniform Building Code, but trying to do as much as one could with as little, you know, cents and dollars and square footage as possible, but trying to make a little house that wants to be big, wants to be a lot bigger than it actually is by lifting it up and kind of looking out there. So there's a big window on the glass window on the side. And then just the one way in. So you kind of come in and sneak in and enter through the middle of the plan. And then another example of a loft. This is a very large door that's kind of very complicated and sliding doors in a loft in Manhattan, but where this kind of movement dance is really the big event in the whole project. So we took that to this idea of kind of expanding space through opening up and overlap to a ferry building in Lower Manhattan at Wall Street. And again, this is a kind of we had very little square footage. The building just clips itself to the side of an existing pier. And there's a very, very thin, I love the photograph because the wall is so thin between the exterior and the interior, but it's also, you know, opens up and kind of doubles or triples the space when it opens up. And the idea was that, I have a pointer, I'm empowered here. Let's see, yes. Yeah, oh, it doesn't work very well. Okay, so this is the building, right? And then all of this is open, and so, you know, everyone's coming from every which way in this is actually Wall Street, but they're coming and going in the building or around the building, getting a ticket, and so there's this kind of flow in and out, and also people who are just going out there because there's very little open space in Lower Manhattan, so it's also a place where people might go and have lunch, or there might be performances out there. So we thought about that surface almost like an aircraft carrier. just this open field that was available. And we wanted to keep it very open so that it was space waiting for different events, and that by the event of opening the door in good weather, which you actually could do quite a bit down there, not this week, but it kind of opens that whole building up. And there it is, kind of opening and closing. But it's an airplane hangar door that goes on the side of the building. But it also provides a canopy for shade, and we're able to kind of naturally ventilate this building because of its location on the water. So here it is, kind of just clipped on the edge, and then these letters that are anamorphically projected up over the side, so the boats, when they're coming from out here, can kind of find where they're going. So then a project of a different scale, this is in Seoul, Korea for Samsung, and a building which is kind of closing itself up and opening itself up at the same time. So the project involved cars. There's a car showroom on the ground floor and on the lower levels, and then a series of programs for restaurants and meeting rooms above and vertical garden. But we were, and this detail shows that kind of location of the car that's being kind of hanging out there on Tehran Boulevard to display itself, but also up within the section of the building, because Samsung was coming out with a car, so this was a very big thing, so they wanted to kind of display the car. But because the upper part of the building is involved in kind of private meetings, there's restaurants, we created a double skin so that these outer panels are actually blank and some are perforated, and there's a space in between them that can be garden or it can create light. Let me go here, with the vertical garden on the back corner, the southwest corner. And then these spaces in between, because there were very large buildings around it and they don't, kind of private meetings are happening in, and they didn't want people necessarily looking in. But this is a drawing that to me describes the project the best, and it may be completely confusing, but it's a bird's eye view looking down where the building is kind of making itself, right, by wrapping these layers around or opening itself up at the same time. There's a central core of columns, and then the floors are cantilevered out from it. So we were able to not have perimeter structure around the skin of the building. In Sagaponack, and I've superimposed that rapier drawing on it because I want to talk about this space that's kind of given over to nothing or everything, or kind of thickness of life. This is a house in Sagaponack, which is out on Long Island. It's one of a number of houses where it's kind of funny because this gentleman decided to build a development, so there was no individual family as a client. So we kind of made it for ourselves, even though we never got to live there. We wish we could. I took my daughters out there. They said, "Oh, we would like to live here." But so it's all about going the kind of opposite of being in the city, going out on the weekend to kind of really be out in the outdoors. But at the same time, it's in an area in which it's like 1 acre site. So you don't necessarily, like that previous building, want people looking in on you. So it created a whole interior space that has a series of kind of skins on the exterior, and that you move in and through. So you kind of come in through these slots. The car goes in here, and there are kind of extra large spaces that you open up into. And then the building, the really living spaces are this thin liner space, kind of like your thin liner. It's just a board in your studio. Well, this is a little thicker liner that has spaces for living. So here are those spaces. Guest room and pool. And so I'm kind of showing these big elephants because we tried to imagine that this is extra large opening in, with the car pulled in, is really how you come into the house, but that is much grander than, even though it's hidden behind the wall, than one would have for a house of this scale. And the idea of kind of inside, outside, and overlapping, and I was talking about this kind of interface of overlapping, of paralleling of programs, we were working with kind of very carefully around the edges of the building. So, exterior slips in, and the way the certain detailing occurs with ceilings and floor materials and glazing, so you might maybe mistake one for the other. In fact, in the bathroom, you know, kind of standing in the shower, looking through at glazing and then seeing a window beyond, a mirror and then a window beyond, so that there are these different layers of where exactly that perimeter lies, like that drawing of the looking down at the Schiller, the Samsung building, and those edges that are constantly kind of redefining themselves through different planes and surfaces. It's a funny story. I remember once going with my partner, with Henry, to the Architectural League in New York and hearing a talk by Max Abramowitz. And Max Abramowitz was a great architect. He was a partner of Wallace Harrison, who worked originally on Lincoln Center, among other things. And he was like 80 years old or something. He came and he talked, and somebody asked a question in the audience, if he ever worked for developers. And he said, oh, no, never worked for developers. Never worked for developers. So Henry and I kind of went away. And Henry's parents were architects. My partner's parents were architects. They both went to Columbia, believe it or not, his mother and father. And so, you know, they had gone to school with Max Abramowitz. And so we thought, oh, never work for a developer. You know, so this is kind of ringing in our ears as we're kind of building our practice. And so we're approached by a developer. I mean, everybody's doing projects for developers in Manhattan, so we thought, okay, we can do this. We can do it. Kind of take a deep breath, and so this is a study. We've worked on a couple projects. This one was built. This is for 53rd Street, and this is a study of the window plane we were working with, where on the street we wanted the windows and the kind of views, because it's just in the middle of the block, right? 53rd Street, can't see much, but you're close to the river in a certain sense, and there are some views of the city. So we thought if we could actually get out in the street, if the room, the spaces could get out and kind of into that space and occupy it somewhat, they'd get a kind of wider view and more light. So that's what we were studying here. And we also were studying these windows, these project out windows that we wanted to pursue. You know, because I guess we have to always make everything more complicated somehow. We ended up with, this is the massing of the project. There are something like 86 units and 53 different types of units. So there are 53 different, so they're not repeated in any way. And we have maisonettes. We have we kind of do this skip stop where one floor goes over the corridor. We have corridors only on every other building, so kind of maximizing out the net to gross. So we had, this is a fun, I want to show this. Let's see now if I can do this. I'm going to show you a funny animation that, this is what they made to sell the project. There are actually more of them that come out, but it's funny because I think it's funny to look at the different types of drawings that are made for projects also. So I'm doing some little asides here, but this was kind of peeling off, and then this is a short version of it, but that's the maisonette. It peeled off all these various units that were inside there, these different types. But this is an example of the kind of, this is the world's lightest laser pointer, this doubling up at corridors only on every other floor, and then they get taken over by units. The street, the maisonette, and actually a garage where you could drive in. So there's this whole kind of variety of spaces. So this is the window that we got very enamored with, that we wanted to use on the facade, and we ended up winning that battle with the developer. So it's a pop-out window where you actually get more ventilation than just an operable window or a hopper window or a casement window that, you know, the amount that it can open in the city. But we wanted to be able to animate the facade, and you're seeing, you know, some of them open here. But this, and also this crenellation, this kind of folding of the skin, folding of the space actually along the edge, allows for these units or the space to actually get pushed out a little bit, as I said, into the street. And then and this is one of those windows, and this is actually where you're kind of in one of these slope spaces, but you can see down the other way is to the water. and use things like angle glass in the lower part of the frame so that people can't see up, you can see down, which is a frit that's in these lower pieces. So that's sometimes we like the construction photos better than the finished. But there it is on 53rd Street. So you can see this skin and then these popping out. So, we're mid-block, we're very tight, and we're trying to make these kind of variety of spaces. And these are these kind of lower maisonettes units and the upper guys. So this question of using glazing and glass, and how it might kind of endorse this notion of moving space in some way. I wanted to show you the Corning Museum of Glass, and this is a kind of sketch early on in the project, and this is a study model. And we had an idea that it would be interesting to see glass on edge first, rather than to see it flat on, but to meet it on edge so that you read and could understand its materiality. So when we were asked to work on the project and we went up to Corning, I realized when I was going to the site that you always have to keep your antenna up when you're going to a site for the first time. So I realized I was looking everywhere for glass because it's Corning Museum of Glass. Like they're the people who work with glass. They've invented all these ways of working with glass. So I was scanning the sites up there, scanning the town for glass, thinking, where would I see it? And I realized that this desire that I had needed to be met somehow by this building we were doing, which was the frontispiece for the museum and became this orientation center building. So that's why we thought about entering it on edge rather than through it, through a window perpendicular to it. And then also supporting that glass, sometimes on the exterior, sometimes on the interior, supporting the roof, so that there was this ambiguity about whether you were inside or outside, and that you were maybe in some space in between. This is the view from that lobby looking out, and the structure moves to the interior here, and then it's on the exterior at other points. And also the glass is tilted, and these guys are tilted, right? So the glass is leaning at 7 degrees. So to make you a little bit uneasy, we hoped, that when you enter, that you didn't know if it was maybe falling or righting itself, what was the glass doing? It's not sitting in its kind of nice, friendly position, but that it's kind of leaning, either falling or trying to stand up. And we use that notion, that idea of that kind of shifting movement in places like, this is a handrail detail where we allow it to kind of slip out, where you're encouraged to look down at something, a space down below. And here at the entry, where the structure with these spider fittings moves to the exterior. There are a lot of different types of photographs that I'm showing here. These were by Arietta Atali, who's an incredible Greek photographer who does all these black and white photos, and she did a whole series of photographs on our work, and I really like her photographs because they're so crude. I mean, they're just rough, they're kind of, it makes the building look kind of ugly, I think, which I like. But because you realize, of course, you're seeing these re-representations, obviously, of this project, that different ways of representing it. This is a view back through that lobby again. There's a Chihuly sculpture here, but and then the landscape. We work with Quinnell Rothschild. We wanted to bring the kind of wildness, like a grove, and then also these grasses right up to the front of the building, very close. Before there was this kind of mowed corporate lawn in front of the building, but we wanted it to push right up against it, so you really felt this, like the space shuttle a little bit, like that kind of juxtaposition against that edge between inside and outside. This is underneath we actually built a kind of ramp for cars, which we turned into a place to sit underneath the cafes. So it looks like a kind of watery space here because the glass reflects into it. and a view of the digital theater, which hangs, oh, this is the one that's really gross, hairy looking, right? Like the grass is on steroids and the driveway. I love this picture. But, so this is the back court where you're actually dropped off by a shuttle bus that can take you into town when you come in, and then underneath it is a kind of cool place to sit and a cafe in here. But this is the digital theater that hangs in this orientation center, and the back wall of the theater is glazed so that it was all set up when it opened so that you went in there, you walked around, it's all very orchestrated. You walked in, you sat down, there was a screen that covered this up. You watched a film about the creation of glass. You kind of get goosebumps, it's for, oh my gosh, and then you exit out, then you go and see all the exhibits, and then the screen goes up, and then you're looking back into that space, with the Chihuly sculpture and into the big space. Well, last year they called us and they wanted to change the digital theater into a hot glass show. So it was kind of wild, because everybody wants to watch the glass being made by these Steuben glass artists. So here is that hanging space, right, the digital theater. And what we did was we cut a hole in the side of it now. We cut a whole hole in the side of our digital theater, and they've installed this glass furnace and all this glass-making equipment into this theater. And so the glass remains, and they keep it open for the most of the time, unless they're having some special evening show. And you can walk, around it and look into this kind of wild stuff that's hot glass that's going on, and they have screens and such. So these guys are pretty incredible. And then George mentioned the North Carolina Museum of Art. We worked with, I wanted to show this project because it's such a crazy project, and I don't know if you know it or don't know it, but we kind of entered this competition just, on the fly, and it was a collaborative venture where we had to go with an artist, a landscape architect, structural engineer. So we worked with Barbara Kruger, who was a friend of mine, and somehow we got this thing. And so the first part of it, there was a large design of the park, and then the first part of it was to design something right adjacent to the existing museum, which is right here. And we had this idea with Barbara to make these very large letters in the landscape that would kind of hold all of these events together. They would hold together this outdoor theater, this outdoor cinema, and kind of a place for the museum to expand into the outdoors. They have lots of, kids come. It's the state museum, so kids are coming in buses from all over the state, and they come here, they go through the museum, and then they want to go outside and eat and what have you. So, and they have music festivals. So we took these very large letters. Barbara, we all kind of worked together on this. These words, picture this, and they're 80 feet long. These are 80 feet long, and they're pressed into the landscape. And to explain what it was like to the client, to the museum, we wanted to make an animation, and this is kind of the history of animation in architecture for you, 2 seconds of it. So this was the first animation we made in our office, and it was such a big deal. So, you can make, you guys are making these things a mile a minute. But we didn't want it to look super real because it would take so much memory to make the trees. So we made it, all the surfaces, we made them transparent. But then, of course, it made that much more memory intensive because you had to render both sides of every object. But it was such a huge file. We had to take the CPU in the office out in a cab and take it somewhere to have it put onto a tape. It was just insane. And it's nothing, it's nothing now. So, this is, not that many years ago. So it's kind of funny. But anyway, so we wanted to show them how you would not really perceive the letters. Initially, when you come in, there's a stage, an outdoor stage where events are, and then the cinema, the screen that's attached to the wall of the existing building, and then the seats of the amphitheater. And it's an open air theater. But then there would be, now you're kind of going up in a helicopter, but there are certain vantage points in the museum where you could look up and see and overview the letters. And then within the letters are other texts. And this is a kind of reverse print, but this is one of the pages of the working drawings for this, because I think it's so funny. these letters, and kind of identifying what they are. And when we took them to the state, because it's a state museum, so they had to be approved by the kind of group of overseers, and they said, "What have you been smoking up there?" in New York when we brought this to them. But they did it. It was really very fun. And so it's about a 2-acre site, and this was on the cover of the Raleigh phone book. This photograph, which I think is really funny. So each of these letters have different texts in them, and they're made of different materials. Like the letter C is sand, so that you could sit on it, bring a beach chair, and watch. They had this incredible outdoor film program, and so that was one of the reasons we wanted to have this huge screen, 50 by 80 foot screen attached to the side of the building, because they had this incredible programming at the museum. And then some of the others pieces have text in them that Barbara did. The letter P, the wall of the letter P, has a whole series of phrases that start with the word please. And then there's also text by writers from North Carolina. So John Maynard Keyes is from North Carolina, so she found a whole bunch of quotes from them. This is one of them. So you kind of find these as you're walking around. And this is the projection booth, where so all of these are kind of apparatus pieces that sit out and share each other's space. The theater and the cinema share each other's territory. And this is a shot of just the film. If you were having a film at night, and they kind of spread out and they can seat about 3,000 people or something. And this is that letter, the letter P wall that, please read the writing on the wall, please, 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 please. So a whole number of phrases that have to do with please that are embedded into that wall. This is the opening. Very festive. So people kind of occupying all these surfaces outside. Another site project at Coney Island, this is for a wall that surrounds the aquarium on the Coney Island boardwalk. So the aquarium is beyond, and this wall is a perimeter treatment that was kind of giving the aquarium both security but also identity and some things like parking and entry and views in. And this is a proposal we did for this, which is a very, very simple idea, which is a series. It's not electrified at all. These boards, just like this is this beautiful Coney Island boardwalk, but the boards are painted with photoluminescent paint, and so they absorb light during the day, and then in the evening at night they emit. So it's free, no electricity, they emit. And then the idea was that this fence, this wave fence, would kind of lift up and expose parts of the aquarium, things you could look into. This is a festival that they have on the boardwalk. People could sit along it. There'd be places for people to kind of nestle along it, but it would kind of screen but also reveal at the same time. So these are some sections kind of showing. This is just the boardwalk. There's a space underneath, people hang out underneath there. Seating, ways to look in, vegetation, shading devices. And then there was a parking structure that was posed against the Cyclone roller coaster with a sand dune, right? So the kind of sand dune comes up, you come out of the parking structure, go through the fence into the aquarium, and the Cyclone roller coaster, that famous roller coaster, sits there beyond. And this is the material, and this is my one animation that doesn't work, which is such a drag, because this is Rishik at our office, but if I clicked on it, it worked. What happens is when it goes dark, this white paint just glows blue. So it's really incredible. You have to believe me. I'll bring it next time. But it's very, very cool. So it would have this kind of glowing effect in the evening with no, artificial illumination on the boardwalk. So George mentioned that we're doing these, they sound like very strange projects, which they are, these ports of entry, or AKA a border station. And we've completed 2 of these projects, and they're the General Services Administration, the federal government, decided, I think under a couple people who've been there, to have this design excellence program where they invite architects to come in and work on projects that are very kind of rough and ready, utilitarian projects. And, you know, they give them to people who are kind of design architects, right? So the first one we won was in Champlain, and then the second one was in Messina. So we're doing these two ports that are not too far from each other, kind of in the middle of nowhere, right along the Canadian and US border. So this is an animation that recreated just kind of thinking about what the idea to cross a line is. And of course, you know, you're crossing the border, but you're going from Canada to the US. That's what the US is concerned with. You're on a line, but everything that's important is perpendicular to that line. So the line gets very thick. We started to think about this thin line that gets very thick, and all of these programs, right, are the programs that you're coming into contact with. So it kind of thickens as you cross, and you know, the border patrol agents learn all this about you that you don't even know because they're reading your license plates in the ground and all this stuff. So, you know, when you pull up and they say, you know, business or pleasure, they already know everything about you because they see it on the screen, you know, because they've got cameras in the ground. But that kind of thickening of that space is what happens as you're crossing. So, you know, in my naivete, and I don't know what, I mean, you guys have probably crossed the border before, but and everybody's crossing in a car because this is no man's land up there. But I thought, you know, oh, you know, it's like a visitor center. You know, you go out and you go into it and, you know, you kind of go in there. But if you have to go into this thing, you're in trouble. So you definitely don't ever want to get out of your car. So we're doing this building, this whole complex, this whole site in which the whole thing is seen from the car, basically. It's all about being seen from the car. And then you have the whole user side, the people who work there, who spend a lot of time in these places and are essentially involved in surveillance, right? It's a police station. They're looking out. They're looking for trouble. They're looking for trouble. Basically, that's the kind of short term. So short definition of what's going on. So these are the two sites. I mean, you know, one, Messina, you kind of come across an island and then there's a bridge and then you come through the port, and then the other at Champlain, near Lake Champlain. So you know, there, of course, the U.S. is concerned with crossing from Canada to the U.S. So one of the first things we realized, and this is, just so you know, it's complicated. This is the site drawing, you know. Oh my God, you know, so this is kind of what's involved. I won't even go there. But we realized that at both of these conditions, because the U.S. looks north to Canada, that the face of the building will forever be in shadow, right? And you're in the north, you're in a really cold area, and this was the existing building. So it's forever in shadow. So, you know, we thought, well, there's something to work with. You know, how do you bring light onto this surface? And how can you, you know, reveal maybe the space of that light or the space beyond it or what happens in there in some way as somebody's driving by? In the first instance, like not even dealing with, you know, the people in there. So this is a little sketch where what we're trying to do. This is actually Henry's sketch where he's, you know, we're saying, could we bring, if this is south and this is north and this is the facade, could we have a skylight that would bring light onto the facade, kind of cheat it and bring it onto the facade and use it, and then at night, because these things are going 724, you know, it would illuminate itself. So this is the section of that condition that we built, where we actually bring the light in and we use polycarbonate in some places and channel glass and ballistic glazing in some places, and then just clear glazing to bring that light onto that surface, that north surface. So there's that surface. So what you're seeing is both reflections on and structure from behind reflected onto it. And all of that is natural light, you know, on the light green of the skylight, providing free light. I love this free light idea, right? As we move, you know, into the millennium and beyond, right? We need more free energy. So there's that surface of the light coming on. And then another piece of this kind of space movement that we got involved with had to do with, this is one of these surveillance windows. It's these kind of very rough and ready buildings, and we looked at, we were kind of very careful about how the materials met the ground and always trying to avoid, when you're doing projects like this, you're finding ways to invent things that, to get around these pragmatics that you're constantly dealing with. So we didn't want to have curbs. We didn't want the buildings to sit on curbs. So we created these kind of gravel edges, and then you'll see in Messina a whole other strategy that we use. But this is this ballistic glass that kind of reveals, surveys out. Here's surveillance out. This is a forensic room looking out onto, at the same time, the inspection booths that you drive through. And this is the light, the north light coming in also. And then in some of these little offices, there are a bunch of little offices, and then we try to cheat the wall back so that you get almost like blinders that are made of light that bring more light into an office rather than just a kind of little slot. This is the canopy. You're looking at it from the US, right? Because it's announcing itself as you come from Canada. But the canopies were, because they have to keep the rain and everything off, and they're kind of protecting this transaction or what happens below. There are these very big pieces in part of the site, and so we kind of treated them differently at Messina and at Champlain. And at Champlain, we used steel plate, just solid steel plate that was 1/2 inch that we thought of as folded, but it eventually was welded to create the span. And this is showing you the canopy at North Carolina, where we had these columns. They're kind of like walking man columns that we felt kind of express movement, but we used a similar technique at Champlain, where or if you think about the glass at Corning, so that it kind of implies movement in its holding up of a roof. But this canopy is made up of a number of pieces that are folded. We'd done a canopy for US Air. It was actually for Continental Airlines at LaGuardia Airport, and this is still there way back. And this was made of Kevlar and carbon fiber, this shell piece, and then glazing that works as a member of the truss together with stainless steel, and then just supports a kind of LED and lighting. And these very lightweight shells, there's 77 of them. It's still there in the US Air Terminal I'm trying to think if it's still, at LaGuardia. And here's a hand drawing of that kind of tilted shell that was describing that transition phase. So this canopy idea we're kind of taking to a whole other scale here at Messina, and thinking of the kind of strength of a folded piece, and how when we assemble those pieces, and I'm sorry it's hard to read all this, but these are all the components of of the canopy element, and then studying it together with our engineers from AirUp and seeing how much we can fold it, where the stresses are, where we have to change the depth of the field or the kinds of welds we're using to be able to create this single surface, essentially. It's just one thing that's then painted and kind of does the whole job. So, and then, I saw your project in Cape Town where they're lifting the parts of the building so that then these come on flatbed trucks and then just get kind of lifted into the site. And there's a number of them there. At Messina, at this other location, just a little farther east, we explored making this kind of continuous surface that would also act as a light fixture. So if the lighting could come from below and then reflect down, and you have to create an incredible high level of lumens, believe it or not, like higher than an office space or anything, so that the agents can see into your car and everything. All this kind of wild requirements that we're working with. So we wanted to create this giant light fixture out of the canopy here. And this is called secondary. And this is where, if you really never want to go here, if you're pulled in here, they're just about to take your whole car apart. So this is a secondary where there's this single canopy, giant canopy with the lighting in the permeable pavement, the asphalt that shines up and then creates this like huge lighting. So this, I love this picture. So this like kind of, I mean, only for the federal government you'd get to make things like this, right? This giant canopy that kind of hangs up there and comes to a very, very thin edge all the way around and is supported by a single row of columns. So that's secondary. So, and then you go in those doors and then it's like, I don't know what happens to your car. I never found out. But so this is the section of that. That's the kind of trick, is that to get it to be very thin and to get this sense of a kind of continuous kind of open space is to make the edge as thin as possible, have a little drip line, and then it gets thick. And you never read the thickness, of course, because you're only reading the edge all the way around. And then it's assembled in a similar way. These are components that are then brought in. I mean, this weather is like a nightmare up there. So imagine how that steel must feel when it's cold like this. But they're brought together, welded, and kind of bondoed up in place. But, you know, that's the canopy. The other element that I was talking about, the surfaces, and this is a very large site. There was a lot of discussion about snow, removing the snow, and people moving around, and where people walk, and you know, it's very dangerous, and you know, people shouldn't be walking around here. And so we came up with this idea of this yellow, that wherever there was yellow would be where people could walk, right? Like a crosswalk. And we would use the yellow as a kind of, you know, movement device, a way to kind of almost like environmental signage. So you would know where you were supposed to go without somebody having to tell you. So, and then we didn't want, remember this idea of the building didn't sit on a curb. We didn't want the building sitting with a little sidewalk. So the permeable pavement comes right up to the building, and then you just have this, the striping that starts to come in. So this is our idea of this, like what it would be like on the site with the yellow. Like the yellow, you know, designates obviously the lanes, and then it starts to designate places where you could walk and edges of walkways. And then it also goes into buildings. And this is another concept drawing of this, so of where the yellow would be in the site without the buildings. So they built it. They built this crazy idea. So there it is. And so these are all of these kind of devices. And then this is, I want to talk about this facade. This is the big canopy. That's the secondary canopy. And then there are two other buildings here. There's a building that's just for truck inspection, and one that's for agents that kind of border when you're doing customs. So there we go. So here's more of this kind of leading you around the site, and then into a building. There's certain walls in the building that are treated with this. This is the commercial side of the, so they separate trucks from passenger cars. And you walk out onto this field of stripes. You walk around, and then it kind of sometimes comes down a slope. This is loading dock over here, and then, you know, kind of creating handrails on the edges of some of these things. And then taking you into, say, the customs building, where it's mostly storage, but then there are some places where people do some transactions. This is like the blue velvet photograph. I think it's really kind of creepy. But these are these two outer buildings. This is the building that is just for, this is customs. This is the building that's just for truck inspection. So imagine a whole building that all it is about is for a truck to come in, X-ray it, and then it drives out. They wanted to, they had wanted to use some kind of prefab building. They said, oh, we can buy these things. There's a machine we can just drive. We said, how can you can't just have a prefab building, you know, and we're designing all of this site. You know, we can do it for the same price. Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we convinced them to let us design it. So this is this kind of crazy building that is a cantilever and then has one wall that supports over here in a different way. So this is showing it under construction. So the roof is supported by these kind of propped up columns with a block wall around that is a shield for projecting, you know, because you're X-raying, right, against, like through the truck against a surface, and nobody should be there, and you know, you don't want it to transmit. But at the same time, we want to bring natural light in. We were trying to bring light into these buildings, which was, I mean, essentially, the government wants to build just bunkers, concrete bunkers up there. So this is, this is the environment we're working within. You'll be there, just wait. So this is this natural clerestory. This is the only place where a human being goes. So you go into this little booth, you close the door, this is your truck, and then there's some controls that are pushed, and they're in there with the guy, and then the thing gets kind of zapped, right? And the truck gets zapped, and then they scan it and see what's inside. And then the lower level, so over here we have a kind of very low clerestory to bring natural light in, and we wanted to create this sense of a building almost floating, like could the building appear to be kind of levitating from the other elevation. On the facade, we had to deal with a number of layers, and so we were moving both the space of that facade kind of in and out, both for security, for natural light, and for projection of this project onto a very large scale in the landscape. So this is this kind of technical drawing that we made explaining like how safe somebody was going to be in here. You know, if somebody's shooting at you, everybody thinks everybody's shooting at them up here. But and then clerestories where it's okay. So this is this front skin where we use polycarbonate that's hung. There's a horizontal truss here that supports the whole thing. It hangs off a kind of lower columns that are beyond, that are inside. But then we wanted to slip these letters up underneath the polycarbonate that say United States very large behind the polycarbonate. These are shots under construction. So here are the different layers. So this is, whenever there's glazing, it's ballistic glass. This is where the port director is. So he's up there, he can see all, right? And then other windows are behind polycarbonate just to bring light in, say, to a gym, into locker rooms, into conference rooms, but not vision glass typically, because that's very premium. This is this horizontal truss that supports the hanging of that whole outer skin, and then the columns that are inboard of that. And this is the final elevation of this building. I don't know if anybody knows anything about this. Does anybody know anything about what happened here? Jude, do you know what happened? Because what happened was they made us take the letters. They made us take the words United States off the building. So the building now does not have these letters on it. They made us take it off because they felt it made the building a target. So it was quite a story. But anyway, so it sits there without its letters right now. Even though everybody knows they're coming into the United States. So I went through a gazillion approval meetings. But now this is a very small little project that we've just completed that we're very proud of for the city of New York. That's an EMS station in the Bronx. It's right here. Look at this neighborhood. And housing. And then the water's over here, the waterfront. But this very rugged area. And this is the city after 9/11 is now building a number of EMS. They're like fire stations, but where emergency service vehicles are parked, out in different areas if you're too far away from a hospital, so that there can be emergency services near you within a certain amount of time that can get to you. So this is one of the first ones that has been built now. And this was the site we had. This guy, just built that house on city land, and now we can't, he's there. So his little house is there. And he's grandfathered in. It's very funny. And there's a community, the community garden was here, so we saved the community garden, which is over here. And this building has a lot of things moving through it. These emergency vehicles drive through it, they park in it, they move around the site, they wash them. And then on the upper level is where the people who work, spend a certain number of hours a day on shifts. There's a gym up there, locker room, such offices. But here it is in the winter, so we can't see the green roof right now. But tiny little building that, kind of like the Massena, the house in Delaware. It's trying to be bigger than it is, trying to kind of show its presence more than it has. And so, it cantilevers in certain areas over to make this upper floor kind of float. And we used the polycarbonate together with glazing and operable glass where we could, we used it in areas where there was, opportunities to look out more. But essentially this is what's happening in the building. You have a kind of drive-through, and then you have this, obviously wanting to create airflow, and then there's a service bay where there's all the equipment is up here and things hang down. It's a kind of a big shed, just like very much like a fire station, but they have more specialized equipment in these emergency trucks. So here's a view of the interior. We just had like about 100 firemen and EMS guys in here in bagpipes and everything. They had a ribbon cutting. It was very fun. And the upper level has all these, this is where all their equipment is in these bags. They run and get it run down the stairs. This is perforated, so kind of, air moves through this, and then those are the truck bays. We used this truss so that it's a kind of, it's not oversized. It appears to be oversized structure because it's cantilevering in these workspaces. But very simple, and it provides. This is the Castle Residence Tower, the NYCHA housing that's right across the street, and we realize, that these people are going to be looking down. This brand new building, they're just going to be looking. That's it. Plus, they're looking out to the water. What else is, in that neighborhood? So we wanted to create what we were calling a fifth facade with the roof, and did put sedum and a green roof, which was quite a battle with the fire department and EMS. They didn't see any reason why they should have to have a green roof. Now they're very happy that they're saying, oh no, now we have the first green roof fire station. But they in fact argued to have no sprinkler, no fire suppression system is in this building because they're firemen, they're EMS, so there's no sprinkler system in the building. I mean, I feel like I could write a novel with all these crazy things that you come up with clients. But there it is. And there's also no elevator. They said they didn't need an elevator, because nobody would be working here who needed an elevator. So somehow it got through the building department. I have no idea without an elevator. And then finally, the very early projects I did for Battery Park City, a program called Art on the Beach, which is also about connecting to these other spaces beyond. And this is called the Freedom of Expression National Monument. And this is where Battery Park City now stands, and it was a beach, and there were programs of temporary art that were created in the summer out there. And the project I did with an artist, Erica Rothenberg, and a performance artist, John Malpede, was really invited. There's a plaque at the bottom of the ramp, and it invited people to step up and speak out to the city, and people would get up there and they would yell like, I hate my boss, or I don't know, different things. And it was poignantly at the World Trade Center, kind of at the financial center. Then later, when New York hosted the Republican National Convention, which was kind of an unusual thing for New York City to do, Creative Time, who had sponsored the project, wanted to recreate the piece, and we had to find a place for it, so we placed it in Foley Square where all the courthouses were, and reconstructed it, and John came and did a performance, John Malpede, and this time we had to have a handicap barrier around it and handicap barrier around the ramp, but we converted it, so we adjusted the space. Thank you. My paperclip jewelry.
Any questions for Laurie Hawkinson? Over here, Matt?
Yeah.
Seems like you guys touched on a little bit on materials and projects to sort of express your concepts.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sort of talk about your guys' mentality on the materials to get your projects through?
Just well,
What approach do you take?
on materials? Well, projects are made of materials, and they're made of details, but I don't think that's enough. I think that, when you put those things together, they have to add up to something more, kind of like 1 + 1 has to equal 3. So, if you just put, wood and glass together, you have to do it for some reason, like maybe it's going to create a glow like it's doing over there behind you, that's creating this other kind of condition, with the light. I mean, I see it differently here than you see it, but, so, I mean, the materials are a vehicle to get somewhere. I always like to think of architecture as, I always like to think of it, but it's, but this whole thing about ideas, so there are ideas, right? And ideas can take the form, you could make a film with an idea, or you could draw a drawing, or you could do a performance, or you could make a building, maybe, with an idea. So the materials are kind of the means for that, but we're very, I'm very interested in new materials. I'm very interested in materials that, there's the tried and true materials, but also like at LaGuardia when we tried to use that canopy and use carbon fiber, something that's incredible, that does a whole lot of work for you in a very efficient way. It's very thin. So they're it's like the Wittgenstein, the meaning is the use. It's when you put it into use, when you put it in its kind of field of action that it has meaning. So otherwise they're like space, they just kind of lie there dead until you actually combine them and kind of try. I don't know if we do that, that's what we try to do anyway. But okay. Yeah.
So you have a wide variety of projects and range of programs.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think there's something about your architecture design that is similar to the way?
I just think it's very, one of the great things, interesting things about being an architect is look at these programs we get to work with. It's so, you become, you're not an expert, you're a kind of amateur in these different, programs. I was telling the faculty that we're doing a veterinary hospital right now at Ohio State. So, rooms for animals, for small animals. So, like, whoever thought you'd be designing something like that? So what's interesting is doing these different types of buildings, but then, we try to bring ideas. You could see, I would think, I tried to show the relationship between things at North Carolina to the border station, like very, very different programs, but trying to bring something we learned somewhere in somewhere else so that we're not constantly, reinventing everything, but then we try to put it in some way, something we learned, and then put it into this project and let it do something else, maybe differently. So whether it's a column or something about the canopy or something about how we think about, glazing or translucency or, so I think program is the narrative for the building. The client gives you a program, but it's your job to give it back to them. Like a director does a script, you give it back to them in another way. You have to interpret it. Right, so you interpret it in some way, like the house. Everybody here would do a different house, given like that same program we had, I'm sure. So, that's what, this notion of the kind of difference of program, but then carrying along a kind of attitude or ideas or curiosity about something that continues from project to project, I guess. Yeah.
The project we'll be working on, as you know, is the high school for fine art.
Mm-hmm.
Showed the project you collaborated on with Barbara Kruger. I think you've done more than one project with her.
Mm-hmm.
She was a friend of yours.
Mm-hmm.
You want to speak a little bit about what it's like to collaborate on a project and what else
Mm-hmm.
especially.
Right. Well, we always like to say that we would, which first of all, she's very smart. She's very knowledgeable about architecture, so it makes it really fun to work with her. But we would say, with Guy Nordenson, who was the engineer, and Nicholas, the landscape architect, and us as architects, we would just switch hats a lot of times. We would wear each other's hats. So, I don't even know who came up with the word picture this, whether it was Barb or one of us. But of course, it's really her, she works with text in all scales. It could be on a matchbook or it could be on a billboard. And she puts pictures together with words. So in this case, we're putting these words in the landscape and at different scales into these programs. So that was really interesting. And we, she would just come to all the meetings. She'd be at the table for all the meetings and, would have input, along, just like you're working with another architect, basically. I think you have to be open. I think you have to be really open and, maybe not thinking that what they're going to do is just put something on the wall and you're going to do your thing over here. Like that wouldn't really be a collaboration if you just said, and we have this space over here on the wall for you to put your art. But if you want to collaborate, then you have to open yourself up to the fact that they might put your hat on, and do something to your building or change something. So you have to decide that you may not know what the outcome's going to be before you start, in a way. I mean, I think that's part of it, is just to kind of trust the person enough that you want to work that way. So we did another competition with her, and I've worked on some of her projects as well. So, but I think it's also just even working with structural engineers, or the Coney Island, the lighting, we worked with Linnea Tillett, who's this incredible lighting designer, and we were like, oh, how can we do this? And so she came to us with this paint idea. And so then, so that is as much a collaboration, I would say, as others too, because that's a huge part of what we were trying to do there. And she brings a lot to the table, or others bring a lot to the table when you're collaborating.
How important was it for you to get your MFA was learned out? Was it part of the process? Or was
No.
it throughout?
I had no idea what I was doing. No, I was an artist. I went to art, I came to New York, I went to the Whitney Independent Study Program, I was an artist, I did like an installation at PS1, and but I was doing work that was site-specific. I was very interested in the space and light artists in California, Robert Irwin, Terrell. I was very interested, Maria Norman. I was very interested and influenced by that work. And then also Mel Bach, a number of people in New York. And I ended up getting a job at the Whitney Museum as a preparator, as a job. I had to have a job, when I got out of school. So I was working and was setting up the exhibitions. And I got to work with Irwin and hung that big screen piece that they just reconstructed recently. And that was very cool. And then but I was very interested in space. And I then left the Whitney and went to work at a place called the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies and ran their exhibition program. So I was an artist, and I wanted to know more and more about architecture. So I decided at one point that I have to go to architecture school because I can't learn enough unless I go to architecture school. So I had done a show at the Institute on John Haydick. We did a show of his 7 houses. And I met him, and I went and applied, and I fortunately got in. But I thought I was going to leave as an artist. But, when you go through an architecture program, as you guys probably know, you see the world in a different way. You just see the world differently. It's a kind of an indoctrination that, you come out, you're an architect. And I'm not unhappy about it, but I feel like I'm doing the same thing, just with more people. Bigger budgets, more people. I get to work with engineers who are really smart and, talented, and it's like incredible fun. But I had no intention of being an architect. And then my partner is trained in a more kind of traditional, like Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, Fulbright, that kind of thing. Richard Meyer. So, different. Just a wild route to get to where yeah.
I didn't hear much about the next 5 years or 10 years in your practice.
Well, we're working in New York. We have projects on the boards where, I didn't show what we're working on now. Is that what you're saying? The most recent one is the EMS station, right, and the 53rd Street. But I like to build. So we'd like to, kind of have, if we can. The projects that we show that aren't built, I see them as buildings, and I see them as, but I'm very, we're very invested in getting to actually build something. So we have some things in the cooker, so to speak. Anyone else? No? Yeah, yeah.
Now that you can stand back from the border crossing project,
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about your experience working with the GSA.
Mhm.
Is that largely a tale of constraints and problems, or were there opportunities or things you felt you learned that were really surprising and useful as you go forward?
Well, after having done the EMS station for the city of New York, we would love to do a GSA project. No, we're doing actually we're doing a library also for the city of New York. So we're very it's really a privilege to be able to do a public building, a building for the public. I feel like I'm giving back, even if it's an EMS station or we have some park, Louise Nevelson Plaza in Lower Manhattan, that you get to give something back to the city. And those projects are, they're rough. They're really rough. But the people working there are smart. They're smart people. There are architects working there. Got some good architects working there. But you have, the books, the constraints, the manuals that you have to go through, are intense. But, I think, other people have survived doing it. I think my friend Tom Main has survived some of these. But they're hard projects, but we had a courthouse project, which we were very excited about, with a woman judge in Maryland, but the whole thing went south because the GSA, that part of that regional office was having some issues. So that didn't go ahead. That would have been interesting to do. But, I think on the one hand, it's super interesting to be able to do just a working building as a piece of design, to think about it as a piece of design, and then also to do something that's in the public realm, that people look at, people engage with every day, and you want to have it hold up over time and have maybe some meaning. I don't know. If you're lucky, I don't know. But so that whole developer thing was kind of, I don't know how much people work for developers. We have a real estate program at Columbia, and I teach a studio with Vishan Chakrabarti every year, usually we do real estate and architecture, so, it's like kind of uncomfortable bedfellows, but, you do it because there's also public and private partnerships, too, so there's also different ways to skin it.
Thank you for kicking this off. We think it will be a great set of conversations over the 3 visits this semester. So thank you all.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to meeting you guys.